Hi, everyone. This is Amanda Hsieh. Welcome back to ESG Decoded. I'm really excited to be speaking with Michele Demers today. She's a founder and CEO of Boundless Impact Research and Analytics. And we're going to be talking about life cycle assessments and how they're helping to scale clean tech investments. Michele, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me. Pleasure to be here, Amanda.
Thank you for making the time. Will you tell everyone a little bit about Boundless?
Absolutely. So Boundless Impact Research and Analytics is an environmental research and analytics firm. And we are specialized in rapid life cycle assessments, which I will explain what that means for clean tech companies and investors. And we have been doing this for several years now, and we are helping move investment dollars more quickly to the most promising emerging clean tech companies. And we're also, we believe, helping these companies take the friction out of fundraising or customer acquisition or differentiating their products, different ways that they need to actually really be able to demonstrate that their product is different and better and an improvement to the status quo. And we believe that using science to validate performance is an excellent way to just provide those numbers. We're sort of I guess you call us the anti-greenwashing, because we're just really trying to prove the sustainability story in a compelling, data-driven way that companies can use to accelerate their development.
There's so much to unpack there. So we're going to, I think, take it step by step. But there's so many things I want to ask you about in just that little intro of what Boundless does. Maybe we can start by just, we've done a few podcast episodes on life cycle assessments or LCAs, but will you give everyone just a quick reminder, a brief overview of what is an LCA and how does it differ than a greenhouse gas footprint of a company, for example?
Sure. So life cycle assessment is ISO compliant. It's been around for several decades. And it was created in environmental engineering circles as the most reliable way to look at the full environmental footprint of a product throughout its entire life cycle. And GHG footprint is absolutely the North Star metric that all LCAs include. But it isn't the only metric. And we call them EKPIs, Environmental Key Performance Indicators at Boundless. And because some products, like batteries, take batteries, for example, you're going to see very similar GHG performance among a lot of batteries. You want to know how toxic are the materials used in the production process? How much water do they use? What's the carbon payback time? What's the levelized cost of electricity? And how does that relate to the commercial viability of the company?
And tell me a little bit more about your rapid LCA. And I think something that you mentioned is you're the anti-greenwashing. So tell us a little bit more about rapid LCAs and how you're preventing that. What I didn't even know there was greenwashing happening in LCAs. Please tell us more.
Well, it's not happening in LCA as much as companies are using the word LCA because they're doing their own LCAs internally, and then they're not using ISO guided methods such as getting them independently validated by a third party. And so there's a lot of people throwing around the word LCA even now, in addition to just classic greenwashing where companies are just self-reporting data. It's important when you do an LCA that you follow certain ISO principles, such as independently validating data. So we always hire an independent expert, even though we do our LCAs in a matter of weeks versus months. And we're able to do that because we only select the environmental metrics that are the most relevant for a given industry. We still hire an independent expert to review the data the company gives us so that we have an independent reviewer. They also do a peer review of our study. We still maintain certain aspects of what is considered ISO compliant LCAs to make sure that companies aren't greenwashing. They're not taking an industry data point and attributing it to their own performance. They're taking the time to actually measure what is the energy use in their production process, where did they source their materials, and many important factors that go into measuring the product life cycle in an honest and transparent way.
And what I'm thinking about is that if you're not following the ISO methodology to its fullest, how do you really know that you're comparing apples to apples?
Well, that's right. And one of the reasons we're trying to develop this rapid LCA method is we're trying to normalize data a bit by using the same metrics within each industry. Certainly can't use the same metrics to measure the environmental performance of an alternative protein versus an electric vehicle battery, because you're talking about different environmental metrics. However, within each of those industries, we're using the same metrics. That isn't always the case with LCAs. Oftentimes, people are just coming up with the metrics that make their product look the best, and they're leaving out other important metrics. That shouldn't be happening. And then it's really important to measure apples to apples, like you're saying, so that investors and customers and other stakeholders can understand how one technology compares to another. And that's why we're big evangelists of life cycle assessment methods at Boundless, because we really believe you can do a lot better comparison between companies in terms of understanding their environmental footprint using a product LCA data, which is much more normalized and science-based and based in these, various metrics that are used in the life cycle community, versus scope 1, 2, 3 emissions reporting, which are important for reporting and compliance purposes, but they're not going to be helpful with comparisons between companies in terms of their performance.
You mentioned science-based. Can you tell me more about that? That's
Yep.
interesting. I want to understand what you mean by science-based.
So we use statistically rigorous life cycle assessment methods in the way that we gather the data and build models to assess the validity of a product. We collect the data. We use, as I said, we hire and recruit independent industry experts to review the data. We use certain types of assumptions in calculating the let's say, greenhouse gas footprint or the water eutrophication. Science is about using methods that are tried and true, and using the same methods to normalize data so you can make comparisons. And we use the same metric and the same unit of measure when we're looking at water eutrophication, which is a water toxicity metric, or we're looking at GHG. And it's really important to abide by certain rules and methods with science. We also are real believers in the results being validated and the assumptions that we make behind some of the technical analysis we do when we're assessing different metrics for different industries that we've had, that we're using other metrics and other methods that have been used, and there's scientific precedent in the literature for those methods or for those metrics. There are assumptions that you need to make, and there's ways of using science to reduce the uncertainty in an analysis, and it's using something they call sensitivity analysis, which we use in doing life cycle assessment. And that's when there's a higher degree of uncertainty in data. You can start to break things down into more digestible parts and do sensitivity analysis around the uncertainty in certain aspects of the data. There's all these methods that are in this life cycle assessment approach that are really useful for for companies as well as the investors in them. So, for example, without scientific validation or having an independent party review the data, results that companies provide can be too easily skewed to represent only the positive attributes of a company's environmental performance. And it's important that that things are being measured objectively.
I want to understand the difference between validation and peer review. Is that the same thing or is that different?
So they're two different things. So validation, we use an expert to review the data that the company gives us. And that's one aspect of using of validation that we do, where they actually review the data that the company gives us and they have no connection to the company. We have other methods for validating the data, such as comparing them to industry benchmarks that we find and doing very rigorous statistical analysis to build those industry benchmarks using primary research. But peer review means that the entire study we've done gets a review by an industry expert in that same industry. And it's just another step in the process. So they do both of these things when they do an analysis. They do a review of our analysis.
Great. Thank you for clarifying that. I wanted to dig into or ask, when you're doing these LCAs, are there ever surprises for clients when they're analyzing their product?
Yes.
And surprises as, oh, this is a hot spot that we didn't realize, or oh, I guess we didn't think about this
Right.
as much as being as impactful as it is. Can you talk about some of those kind of aha moments or insights that you're able to deliver?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, we were assessing a ag biotech company, and they were really excited about the impressive performance that their biological for crop protection, it was a biopesticide, had compared to competing technologies in more industrial pesticides in terms of not, basically killing bees and pollinators. We were able to show the data, and the comparison made their product stand out even more. That's a biodiversity metric. Or looking at even like water toxicity, where we are looking at the effect from those chemicals going into the local, water, rivers and streams, and affecting the fish and invertebrate wildlife in the local streams. We were able to show even human toxicity, different types of human toxicity. That was, and then if we're assessing a waste to, fuels company, we can measure things like ocean plastics avoidance. Or we can measure, other like microplastics. It's water eutrophication can sometimes be measuring the amount of microplastics in water, things like that. But there's also times when we do these assessments and companies will be really surprised and disappointed in their GHG performance compared to, competitors, because they are using more energy in their production process than they realize. They've also, done the work of analyzing and figuring out where they can use renewable energy in their process. There's different ways that you can reduce your GHG footprint. And that is an example of, we do sometimes do research on competitors as well, and show that, companies are sometimes surprised that their competitors that they're closer in performance to their competitors. And so they'll figure out ways that they can tweak their product or their operations to make a bigger difference in how they differentiate their product from competitors in terms of how to different, how they're, if they're an earlier stage company, or even if they're not an early stage company, they might be making pretty radical changes as a result of what they learn from the LCA.
One thing I was going to ask you about is typically at what stage of product development or kind of the life cycle of a startup do they come? When is this analysis appropriate? But it sounds like it could be clean tech startups at all stages of
Well, no, not exactly. We don't recommend R&D phase. Clean tech
okay.
startups do an LCA until they've got enough there on their product that we can collect data against it. So we turn down customers because we think they're too early.
I see.
And that's when we recommend using these what I think are generally overly simplistic carbon calculators that are out in the marketplace. That's not a bad idea for really early stage companies when they need to do some sort of reporting to investors. Then that's the time, at that super early stage, we recommend those carbon calculators.
There's just not enough data, is what I'm hearing at those really early stages. You really have to be able to have something to share and to measure.
Right.
Gotcha.
Right. Exactly.
What I know of, just I'll call it a traditional LCA, is all the other environmental performance metrics that you're able to measure. You mentioned some of those before, like the microplastics. In the case of the ag tech company, how it was impacting pollinators, bees and other pollinators. That's really on top of what I think of a typical LCA, which is going to look at greenhouse gas emissions, perhaps energy use, maybe water if that's requested. That's really going above beyond and really helping illustrate the complete, let's say, footprint or of the product. I think that could be really interesting to investors.
Yeah, and in Europe, they're already regulating it. So they have something called a product environmental footprint, as well as this European taxonomy, and they are requiring companies and funds to report on other metrics beyond just GHG. They're requiring water reporting on use and amounts and toxicity in water. They're requiring reporting on air pollution, just by way of example. And they have others like in biodiversity and toxicity where they've got stricter reporting standards. So there are definitely new regulations that are emerging that require beyond just GHG. And we have something in the United States called an environmental product declaration, which is what sustainable products use to basically get a stamp from the US government. And those require LCAs.
Can you talk about a little bit about how investors and funds are using these rapid LCAs? Is it typically during the due diligence process or is it afterwards?
It's both. But we have had funds that have engaged us to do an assessment as part of their technical diligence. But they're also using them to decide on follow-up funding rounds. They're using them to, report on their portfolio's performance when they're going out to raise money from additional LPs, or they're using them to report to existing LPs. All of the above.
Gotcha. Who would you say is or rapid LCAs perfect for? It sounds like clean tech are a certain stage, certain types of investors as well. What are some other use cases for this that we should know about?
I mean, we're working with small and mid-sized public companies that are also emerging clean tech companies. They don't have to be private companies. And I definitely think, as I was mentioning, like private equity funds and VCs where they need to report to their LPs. Large companies could really use, we've worked with some big companies that are not only wanting to analyze their own product, but they're using some of the analytics that we can generate as a result of having done a lot of these assessments over the last 5 years. We can generate some interesting insights into, let's say they're considering using a different material in a product. We can model out for them what are the types of materials and how do they perform better and how would they perform better on their product. And all of those things can be really useful before they take the time to integrate it and spend the money of integrating it into and building a new product. So that those kinds of scenarios that we can do using our data and analytics can be super helpful.
Well, Michele, thank you so much for coming on our podcast. This is wonderful. Any last thoughts that you want to share with the audience?
Be skeptical, because there's a lot of excitement out there, I think, in clean tech. I just think there's a lot of different types of tools out there that are emerging, and I'm a little wary of some of the AI-based tools that are doing pure AI and scraping data and not including humans in the analysis. I'm not sure we're there yet. I think you really do need that human review aspect of analyzing the data and reviewing it, getting an independent expert. We learn so much from these experts that help us on these assessments. So I would just say, I know there's all this hoopla about AI, and we're even using AI, large language models and starting to use it in the way we do the searches on these scientific publications. But that said, can't replace the intelligence of a human. We're not there yet, because we've been using them. And by the way, they make tons of mistakes, which everyone's finding with ChatGPT.
Yes.
You can use them a little bit and they guide you a little bit, but they're not replacing the human by any stretch.
That's what we've seen as well. They're a good way kind of to start, but you still need that expert really in the room to, as you said, be a little bit cautious, have some scrutiny, scrutinize what those claims are really, what are they really claiming, and what can we believe here? Thanks, Michele.
Thanks, Amanda.